Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for What's New with Electric Vehicles and Electric Vehicles Charging Stations webinar. My name is Beth, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. I'd like to start off with a safety moment. Safety is a core value at PGE, and we want to remind you to be safe around electricity. As you consider installing or retrofitting new equipment, please keep safety in mind. We also want to encourage your family, tenants, and staff to be prepared with an outage kit. And you can visit our website for more safety information, and I'll be sending you the link to that in just a moment. I'd also like to thank the Energy Trust of Oregon and the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance for their support in co-sponsoring this series of free energy efficiency trainings, which are open to all Northwest utilities and their customers. Before I introduce this afternoon's presenters, I'd like to show you some tools you'll be using during the webinar. To the right of your screen, you'll see several windows. At the top is the participants window. Then after that is the chat window, and at the end of the webinar, you'll see the polling window, which will appear at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can submit them to me, the host, through chat, and I'll ask the presenters the questions at the end of the webinar. This will be an informal session today, so if you'd like to share an example or you have a question you would like the presenters to address immediately, please feel free to raise your hand using the raise hand icon provided at the bottom of the participants window. At the top left corner of your screen, underneath the Quick Start tab, which it looks like this, you'll see several tools. The pointer tool, the text tool, and the marker tool. The presenters will be asking you to use these during specific slides during the webinar, so please familiarize yourselves with these and they will remind you about that. And now I'd like to introduce this afternoon's presenters, Rick Durst. Rick is a Transportation Electrification Project Manager at PGE. Rick has 24 years in the electric utility industry, plus 10 years as an electrician in the U.S. Navy Nuclear Submarine Service. He has been driving EVs since 1995 and driven more than 120,000 electric miles. Rick has coordinated the installation of more than 60 charging stations, including 11 quick charge stations. Our second presenter is Stan Sitzer, also Transportation Electrification Project Manager at PGE. Stan has helped PGE customers understand and benefit from innovative technologies like smart meters and web-based information. Currently, Stan is part of the PGE team that facilitates electric transportation options for customers. Oregonians are choosing electricity as their transportation fuel to save money, shrink their environmental footprint, and reduce our nation's dependence on foreign oil. So with that, I would like to hand the presentation over to Rick Durst. Rick?
Thanks very much, Beth, for the introduction. First of all, I want to thank everybody who's attending. It's a pleasure for me to discuss this topic with you. I'm really passionate about EVs and thankful that I work for a company where I can work on projects that are fun and exciting like this. This webinar covers many of the same topics that we'll be covering in much more depth in our fall electric vehicle seminar that Beth will talk about later on. Stan Sitzer will start off with an encouragement that you can do this, and then I'll take you through two introductory topics about electric vehicles and EV charging. Then I'll be covering charging equipment manufacturers and different networks, and then walk you through the steps to installing EV charging. After that, Stan will be back talking about tax credits and promotions. So first of all, it's really about you. Something that we want to do is focus our attention on topics that are of interest to the audience that's actually here today. So what I want you to do is use your marker tool that Beth had talked about, the ones up in this area at the top of your screen, and select the marker, and then check in here if you're a business customer and want us to focus on things that have to do with fleets. If you're looking at providing workplace charging like to employees, or maybe charging for customers, then go ahead and check in those boxes here. If you're interested in residential charging and want us to talk a little bit about things in your home, or maybe you have condos and you're looking at providing them to people who are owners of the condos, or maybe an apartment complex, go ahead and check those in the box here, and we'll just get an idea of who's attending here. Okay, great. We have a pretty good idea of who's out there today, so thanks a lot. And I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Stan, and he'll go through the next topics with you.
Thanks, Rick. I have a message of encouragement for you this afternoon. When it comes to electric vehicle charging, you can do it. You are not alone. You're not the first. Now, it may not be your area of interest. You may have customers who are coming to you and saying, when I shop at your store, I'd like to be able to plug in and charge up my car. You may have tenants at an apartment complex or perhaps a condominium association. And you're saying, we want to find a way to be able to charge at home. Even with a multifamily situation. Or you may be an employer and some of your workers are coming to you and saying, hey, I'd like to be able to charge up when I'm at work. Whatever situation you're coming from, you can do it, and someone else has gone before you. There are over 700 public charging stations in Oregon, and that's actually the top rating per capita in the United States, according to plugshare.com. So there's a lot of charging stations out there. There are hundreds more private chargers in homes and behind the gate at businesses. And then there are thousands of EVs, upwards of 3,000 in Oregon. Thanks, Beth. When we look at a map of the United States, we can see the distribution of people who are using electricity as a transportation fuel. These are the charging stations shown across the country. And even though every 120-volt outlet is a fuel pump, this is showing the level 2 and level 3 chargers that are installed across the country. Next slide, please. Closer to home, we'd like you to take one of the tools in the upper left and use it to show where you are and where you're thinking about installing electric vehicle charging. That's me out in Boring. So go ahead and use your pointer or a marker to indicate your general location. Oregon has crossed several big milestones recently in electric vehicle charging. The Oregon Electric Highway is open for business, and you could drive from Ashland, Oregon, all the way up I-5 to Vancouver, British Columbia, using quick charging along the way. We've also recently electrified the state capitol in Salem with electric vehicle charging stations. Oh, this is good. So we've got the town surrounded here. I see Newburgh, Beaver Creek. That's great. Good distribution. Thanks for marking that up. You know, it's hard to predict the future, but that doesn't prevent a lot of smart people from trying to do it. And what this chart shows is various projections about how many electric vehicles there might be in the United States in the next 10 or 20 years. And it's in the millions. And I think what we have going on here is we've got a very encouraging environment with federal, state, and local policies supporting the adoption of electricity as a transportation fuel. We also have the Environmental Protection Agency, which has rules about the average mile per gallon of the fleets. In the year 2025, the average mile per gallon needs to be 54.5. And electric vehicles are one of the ways that the auto manufacturers are going to get there. So as you consider installing EV charging, you might say, well, is this a flash in the pan? Is there going to be more of this, or is it going to level off? We think there's going to be more, and we think there's going to be a lot more. And so there will be, if you've got 2 or 3 employees right now, or 2 or 3 tenants right now, or 2 or 3 customers right now asking for this, there are going to be many, many more in the future. In terms of the actual sales of the vehicles, I prefer to look at the actual sales instead of projections into the future. Let's take a look back a couple of years. From the introduction of the Chevrolet Volt and the Nissan Leaf at the end of 2010, you can see an upward curve there. The red marks are the additional sales, the blues are the cumulative, and so we're seeing a growth. 17,000 electric vehicles sold in the United States in 2011. That was tripled in 2012 to 54,000. So this thing is growing, and your timing is right. Now, let's take a minute and simplify or demystify electric vehicle charging. An electric vehicle charging station is not rocket science. When I was a kid, a friend of mine's dad worked at Rocketdyne, and he actually designed the main rocket nozzles for the space shuttle. And that was rocket science. And his view of the world was basically putting things into two buckets. It's either complicated or it's simple. And designing rocket nozzles is complicated. He felt driving in Los Angeles area traffic at rush hour was complicated. But installing a dishwasher in the kitchen of his home, that's simple. Installing a electric clothes dryer, that's simple. And that's what we're dealing with here. The amount of power used by most electric vehicles is about the same as a 240-volt electric clothes dryer. We've all done this kind of thing before. I remember when my grandmother got her first electric clothes dryer, and there were some conversations around the dinner table about how that's going to work, and this is something we want to do, and we have to figure it out. They put in a circuit, they put in the vent, they put in the dryer, and ta-da, it's done. We've done this kind of thing before, and you can do it too. When you think about it, all cars have been electrified for a long time. There's the headlights, the taillights, the windshield wipers. There's the radio. The analog brakes are controlled electronically, heating and cooling systems. The way it's worked, though, is that the car's been off the grid. It's generated its own power to power these systems. Now, electricity powers all those systems and also the driving wheels as well. So the car is moving from off the grid to on the grid. And there's some real benefits of using electricity as a transportation fuel. It's better for the environment. No matter how you generate the electricity, there's a reduction in the carbon emissions. It's striking a blow for energy independence as we get off foreign oil using energy we've made here at home. And there's a lower operational cost, and fleet managers are discovering that. One report recently showed that after 120,000 miles of driving, the overall cost of ownership on an electric vehicle is less than gas and less than diesel. So let's take a look at a quick cost comparison. What I'd like you to do is take your marker or pencil tool in the top left, and I'll use the color green, and I'm writing down the miles per gallon of our family minivan here, 24 miles per gallon. Well, we can get a lot lower cost per mile by driving electric than by driving that minivan. For example, you go ahead and write in a number up above of what the miles per gallon is of the vehicle you're driving or you have at home. And I'll go ahead through this comparison. If you drove 12,000 miles a year, and let's say we spotted the gasoline car 30 miles per gallon, if it's $3.50 a gallon for gasoline, and that's actually lower than the cost you see out there on the street today, you're going to be spending $1,400 a year for fuel, giving you, if you divide it over the miles, a cost per mile of 11.7 cents. With an electric vehicle, driving the same number of miles and getting 4 miles per kilowatt, which is about average, you're going to buy 3,000 kilowatts at 10 cents a kilowatt, and that's a $300 annual cost. Only 2.5 cents per mile. That's a lot less than the 11.7, and I'm actually paying more for that with my 24 mile per gallon minivan. I see up here there's a couple people with 30, somebody with 22. You would even save more driving electric. And then at the bottom, it shows how you can even save more with time of use pricing. Electricity goes on sale at night, and if you enroll in the time of use pricing program, you can save even more. This is what has fleet managers excited about electric vehicles. If you look around you, you'll see electric powered vehicles all over Oregon. There's the OHSU tram, that's powered with electricity. There's the cars down at Electric Avenue at Portland State University. There's the streetcar that's made and operated in Portland, and even the Canby ferry boat was just refurbished with an all-electric drive system. So again, this is something that's all around us, and you can do it, and I'm going to turn it back over to Rick. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Stan. This table here, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about electric vehicles and the different types of vehicles. So across the top, we have the vehicle types. Sorry about this, hang on. So vehicle types going across the top. And then, so we have a hybrid vehicle, and sorry, on the bottom left there's the vehicle attributes. So whether they plug in or not, their typical range, if they have an all-electric range or not, and then some examples of these cars. So hybrid vehicles, they don't plug in. They do have electric motors in them, and that electricity comes from a battery, but that battery is charged up when the car is running on gas or in some cases diesel. And so, it doesn't plug in, so it doesn't run off the grid. They have a range of about 400 to 500 miles. That's really depending on the size of the gas tank. They don't have an all-electric range because the fuel, like I mentioned, is being provided by the gas or the diesel. And examples, the most common one is the Toyota Prius. That's the one that's been around the longest. And there's the Ford Escape, and there's almost every manufacturer and every different types of models have an option for hybrid vehicles, which the first part of your driving runs off of electricity, so that it'll start your car moving with electricity, which is a lot more efficient than stepping on the accelerator pedal and getting a lot of gas in the system to get the vehicle up and moving. And so you get a better fuel economy typically with the hybrid vehicles. The next one we'll talk about is the plug-in hybrid, or PHEV. And we'll talk about the different charging levels, but the first thing is it does plug in to level 1 or level 2. And its range is typically the same thing. It's about 400 to 500 miles. Not 4 like it shows there. It's really 400 to 500 miles. And then they have an all-electric range. For example, the Prius plug-in has about 9 to 11 mile range. And then the Chevy Volt, which is another plug-in hybrid, has a range of up to about 35 miles. The newer 2014 is expected to have about a 40-mile range. And so that's the all-electric range that it'll run on electricity before it switches over to run on gas. So as I mentioned, a couple examples, there's a Prius plug-in, there's a Chevy Volt, there's a Ford C-Max Energy, and also conversion vehicles. Then there's a battery electric vehicle, or BEV, and it can use a level 1 or level 2 charge. Some of them can do DC quick charging. Again, we'll talk about charging levels in a little bit. And then it has an all-electric range, like Nissan Leaf is around 80 to 100 miles, and you can go all the way up to the Tesla S model, which has a 300-mile range. So examples of these vehicles are Chevy Spark, has about a 80-mile range, and there's Ford Focus, Honda Fit, Mitsubishi i-Car, Nissan Leaf, Smart Car has an electric version as well, and then there's the Tesla Model S and the Roadsters. So this next section here, I had mentioned before that I said it's really all about you. Well, it's not about you anymore. It's about the vehicles. So we introduced the vehicles, and now we want to know, though, how you interact with these. So I'm going to have you use your tools up above, and I want you to go ahead and think about, have you seen any of these? I say see them in the wild. So is it actually out, not in a showroom somewhere, but is out and somebody using it? So have you seen a hybrid vehicle? So have you seen a Toyota Prius or a Ford Escape or any of those? Go ahead and check in that box with your tool. Have you rented an EV? Go ahead and check that. And across the top, you'll see, maybe your work has hybrid vehicles, or maybe your work has, has rented a vehicle. Do you know somebody in your neighborhood or a friend who has these types of vehicles? And then also go ahead and on the home section over here, do you have one of these vehicles at home? So do you have a hybrid vehicle, or have you rented an EV? Have you done a test drive of a vehicle? And then we say owned more than one. So I'm going to go ahead and put myself in that box because I'm on my 3rd electric vehicle. And so I'm going to add that over here. So go ahead and kind of fill this out. If your company has more than one, then go ahead and check that as well. We just want to get an idea of what you've seen around here and what your familiarity is with these vehicles. So it looks like people are very familiar with hybrid vehicles, and interesting enough, they've been around for more than 10 years now. And what we're seeing right now with the electric vehicles, like Stan was talking about, the adoption of electric vehicles is actually quite a bit higher than the adoption of the hybrid vehicles that have been around for more than 10 years. Okay, so I did mention that we were going to start talking about EV charging. So I'm going to go through some quick definitions of the different EV charging levels. So first of all, there's level 1 charging. Level 1 charging is 120 volts, so it's like a standard wall outlet. The big difference here is that it needs to be a dedicated outlet, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But it's a 120 volt outlet. The cars all come with a cord that plugs into 120 volts, and then the other end of the connector plugs into the car, and so you can charge the car. The chargers are actually on board the vehicle, so this is just a connection from the electricity source to the vehicle that makes it safe. And so all the new vehicles will come with this cord set, and actually this connector that's on here is the same style that's used on level 2. So it has a standard connector, so all vehicles coming out will have this standard connector on it, so you can plug into any of the charging stations. The level 2 uses 208 to 240 volts. 208 is typical in a commercial space, where 240 volts is what you'd have at home. And also some businesses also will have 240 volts available. So these are a couple pictures of some examples of charging stations that you'll see out here in Oregon. And all the new vehicles, again, will come with this same standard connector that the level 1 has. So any of the stations that are out there, the new vehicles would be able to plug into and use. The next level is DC quick charging. This is quite a bit higher power level. Typically, they're served with 3-phase power, so you wouldn't have something like this in your home. And there are a little bit limited on the vehicles that they can charge. The Nissan Leaf, the Mitsubishi i-Car, and the Chevy Spark will all be able to use DC quick charging. Okay, so now I've told you, first of all, it's all about you. So I changed that to all about the vehicles. Now it's all about EV charging. So we're going to use the same type of table or graph. So if you've seen one, then go ahead and check in this box over here. If you have one at your home, then go ahead and check this box over here. If you've seen them and had them at home, or have a friend or a neighbor who has one, you have them at the workplace, you've used one, if you've seen someone else using one, like at work, or a friend or a neighbor has one, then go ahead and kind of fill this table out here. The biggest thing here, I like all the people checking in the seen one in the wild or used one, because as Stan said, there's over 700 charging stations out here in Oregon, and this is the highest per capita that we've seen across the United States. And the most interesting thing about this is, you know, we've always talked about, well, what should come first, the chicken or the egg? So do we need to get the charging stations out there so people feel comfortable with the electric vehicles? And that's really what we've been trying to do here in Oregon. We started off working with a number of different companies to put charging station infrastructure in here. Oregon's been awarded some federal grants. The state of Oregon's been instrumental in helping make this happen as well. And it's really something that Oregonians should be proud of. Okay, so EV charging network. So one of the most frequently asked questions is there a fee to use these stations? And right now there's access cards required at a lot of different stations. If you think back at the ATM machines when they first came out, you got a card to work in your ATM machine, and it only worked in your machine. People would think that's almost unheard of nowadays. Well, with the charging network right now, there's a bunch of different access cards that are required, and the different companies have their own cards to use. But the two biggest companies that are the ones that have the most chargers here in Oregon are Blink and, let me change color here. Blink and AeroVironment. They have the largest numbers of chargers in this area. And then ChargePoint is another one, has a number of them here in Oregon. Well, Blink and ChargePoint have formed a new kind of cooperative venture to be able to move this to a system where maybe you can only have one access card, but you can access all the different types of stations. And so they're starting to work together to see how that would evolve. So the different ones that we have here in Oregon, right now there's about 6 different types of access cards, but again, we're in early stages here, and we see that coming to be more of like the ATM cards or credit card type access that you'll be able to use that all over the place with just one card. So when Stan was showing you a picture of across the United States, this is a plug share map, and in this case here we have only the DC quick charges highlighted. And just like Stan was talking about for all charging stations nationwide, I think when we did the count a couple weeks ago of all the DC quick charge stations, it's 1 in 5 are here in Oregon across the United States. So, so this is Oregon and Washington, and we talked about the different networks. The AeroVironment stations have the network of chargers here, and going down I-5 and out on the coast and in some of these outskirt areas here. A few down in here. And then most of the other ones are the Blink network for these chargers. And so they're the ones in the downtown areas or the major metropolitan areas of Vancouver, Seattle, and down in Salem. When you're looking over more in Southern Oregon, these are all AeroVironment chargers that were put in through a grant with the state of Oregon. And so the state of Oregon and the state of Washington both got similar grants to install charging stations. So those are the ones that have the most quick chargers around in the area. There are a few other quick chargers that are some different networks downtown Portland, and there's one out in Tillamook. So the next thing is we really wanted to talk about, so you're thinking about installing EV charging. Now, I've got a lot of different kind of questions in here about things you need to think about, things you need to do. But as Stan mentioned, it's really something that is, it's not really that hard. It's just, you need to think about a few things. You need to identify what your needs are. What type of charging levels, how many numbers of spots are you thinking about? Who are you serving? Are you serving public or residences of condos or apartments? Is it just for fleet charging for fleet vehicles that you have, or is it for employee parking at the workplace? And then how long are they going to be there? For example, if you were a fast food restaurant, you might think about putting in a DC quick charge station versus level 1 charging. Level 1 charging, I think I didn't mention this before, but level 1 adds about 4 miles an hour that you're plugged in, so it's not going to get you very far. But that would be fine for employees who are parked, 8 hours a day at one place, and that'll get them another 30 miles, and the average commute distance is under 20 miles for people to get to work. Not to say that people don't drive farther than that, but that's kind of the average. That would meet most of the needs of employees to be able to get back home if you just had level 1 charging available. And then, are you going to have people pay for the charging? First of all, is there, for the installation costs of the charging stations and also the equipment, do you already have a budget for that, or is that something like if it's an apartment complex or a condo, are you going to have the end users pay for the installation of that? And then who's going to be responsible for ongoing maintenance, repairs? And then for the use, are you going to charge a fee for it, or will it be free? A couple examples here for this. We had a large employer who initially put in some level 1 stations, and they had a lot of employees using those, but then they kind of got to the point, since there are more and more employees using them, they didn't want to have to provide that electricity free to the employers, and they decided to put in some charge point stations that have an access card that the charge point backend system manages that relationship with the end user to charge a fee for the use. We also had some smaller employers who just left 120 volt outs because they only had like 2 employees doing it, and really, it's 10 to 15 cents an hour that somebody's going to be using it. So it's way less than providing a cup of coffee to your employees. And then where are these going to go? Are they going to be in public spots? For example, if it's an apartment complex, is it going to be for only people who live there, or is it going to be for people who are visiting there, maybe a condo? Um, are they going to be in those common spaces that might be shared between people? Is it going to be in a parking garage? Is it going to be outdoors, so you need to make sure the equipment you buy is outdoor rated? And will it be mounted on a wall, or is it going to be kind of pedestal mounted? So you have to think about those types of things. And again, these aren't things that you have to spend all day trying to think about. You just need to look at your situation. So every situation is going to be different. So a few more things to think about if that wasn't enough. One, we talked about, do you have a budget for this? Is it something you're going to be planning for? One of the things in the introductory flyer that came out for this course was, the two biggest mistakes about EV charging. And the first one is to not plan ahead. If you're doing some work right now in a parking lot and you're tearing up a parking lot to do something, to do some repairs or something like that, think about EV charging. Running a piece of conduit out to where you think you're going to need charging while a parking lot's torn up is going to save you a lot of money in the future. And so if you're also, when you are installing equipment, you make the decision to, then think about the capabilities for expanding that in the future. Because like Stan was talking about with the number of EVs and what we think the adoption rate is going to look like, maybe it's not on your radar right now. Maybe you don't have any employees, or you don't have anybody living in your apartment complex that needs to, but people are starting to ask. 5 years from now, that ask is going to be for more. So if you're putting conduit in, put in extra conduit, put in bigger conduit. In most cases, bigger is better. A lot of times, if you're thinking about communications for the charging stations, some of them, if they're going to collect a fee, they need to communicate with a back-end server. Typically, that's either networked through cellular communications, or it could be over a wireless network. You need to think about how that communication is going to be. If you want to use a wired network, then you want to put in some separate half-inch, or in some cases a 3/4 inch conduit. It's sometimes easier to pull into for communications. You also want to think about accessibility. If you look at this example here in the parking garage, this is at our facility in the World Trade Center. Right now, there aren't any specific ADA requirements, but there are people who need ADA accessible spots who have electric vehicles. So you may want to think about that. And so in this case here in this parking garage, we have some extra space over here. It's not an ADA marked accessible spot, but we're trying to put these and plan these in locations where that accessibility might be a little bit better. Also, we've made these spots a little bit wider because in some cases the parking or the connections, just like on a gas car, all the gas tank fillers aren't on the same area. For electric vehicles, sometimes they're in the front, sometimes they're in the back, sometimes they're on one side or the other side. So they're not standardized either. So you want to make sure there's plenty of room for people to walk around with the cord. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, we talked about the different types of charging. We talked about the different types of use. This table might help you a little bit in kind of evaluating what your needs might be. So on the left side, we have the charging station levels, level 1, level 2, and DC quick charge. We have the typical use for these. Level 1 is where people are going to be parked for typically 6 hours or more. And so you want to think about, if it's for employee parking or it's overnight parking, you can really get away with level 1 parking in a lot of areas. The benefits of that, first of all, the cost is lower to install. I don't have any specific numbers written in here, but I think, on average, you can talk about what it costs for your electrician to install, just a 120-volt outlet. If you want it right next to an electrical panel, that's pretty easy to install. Wouldn't cost more than a couple $100 to do that. But if you decided you wanted it across the room, they're going to have to, fish that through the walls and all that to get it over to where you want it, and that's going to be a more expensive install. But typically, these are going to be lower cost than, the higher power stations. Cost to charge is typically these are using electric rates here for PGE. It'll probably cost about 15 cents an hour for somebody when they're plugged in to charge up on that. So as I said, for level 1 charging, it's a low-cost solution. For workplace or maybe some residential charging, you don't have any cords to worry about. The people using that will have a cord that plugs in. But the biggest thing, it has a slow charging time. If the biggest opposition to that would be a slow charging time. So if you have employees that come to work and need to go out different places during the day, then maybe that level 1 charging is not going to be enough for them. And so you may want to think about level 2. Level 2 typically is going to add about 12 to 24 miles an hour that somebody's plugged in, compared to the level 1 that's about 4 miles every hour. And so people are typically parked 1 to 4 hours at these locations. The cost to install these is quite a bit more than a level 1 station. The cost of these stations vary as well. Cost of a 120 volt outlet itself, you pick those up at Home Depot for a couple bucks. But the level 2 stations, depending upon what you get, do you want something that is networked? So you're using access cards. Do you want it restricted for use to certain vehicles or something like that? Then you're going to want that access card. And so the range of these can be anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 or $4,000 if it's something is outdoor rated use, stainless steel, heavy duty charger. So you're really going to want to think about those costs. We'll talk a little. We'll give you some context for those later on. The electric cost per hour of charge typically is going to be 30 to 60 cents. As I said, the benefits of that is the faster charging times. You'll have options for collecting payments. It attracts long-term customers, maybe if it's a shopping center or a shopping place. For example, Target has done a study that they've talked about on a number of different presentations that I've seen, that for every minute somebody spends in the store, they're spending another $1. And so if you're attracting somebody to spend more time at a location, they're going to typically spend more money there. Some of the things that are, we're talking about pros and cons here. They are higher cost. You do have cords to deal with. You may have some communications fees for network stations, but attracting customers is outweighs some of these cons here. DC quick charge stations. This isn't something you'd have at your house. It uses higher power levels, and this is typically going to be for people who are going to be parked there for an hour or less. These are quite a bit more cost to install. Now, I say the electric cost per hour of charge, it really depends on how long somebody's plugging in, the type of the level of charge that they're at. But it does have the best charging times. Again, you have different payment options. It's going to attract short-term customers. So we see these at places like restaurants or fast food, Burgerville, Elmer's restaurants. We see them in places that people are stopping along the freeway to get from one place to another. So the I-5 corridor and other arterials that feed into I-5 are places that these are going to go. One of the biggest disadvantages of these is limited vehicles that are supported by these. So usually when we put in a quick charge station, we also put in a level 2. But the Nissan Leaf, the Mitsubishi i-Cars, and then when the Chevy Spark comes out, they'll be use DC quick charge stations as well. So there's probably 50 or more vendors of charging station equipment. I've listed the 12 that we know about that are here in Oregon, and I guess if you solely looked at the biggest ones, we did mention that Ecotality and AeroVironment are the ones that have the most equipment here. There are a few other differences on some of the stations. So if you look at some stations, I don't really talk about it, but some of the like fleet equipment or like Tesla Roadsters and stuff, that use a higher power level 2 charging. And so Clipper Creek, which has chargers here, uses some of those higher power ones. some of the charging stations, manufacturers, have DC quick charge stations. So those are some other things to think about when you're looking at types of equipment that you're looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this back over to Stan, and he's going to talk about tax credits and incentives.
Thanks, Rick. So we talked about avoiding the two biggest mistakes in installing electric vehicle charging, and Rick mentioned the first. You want to have a plan. You don't want to go in without a plan. But the second biggest mistake is spending too much. And there's help available in the form of federal and state tax credits to help pay for your project. I'm going to use my own home as an example where I installed a level 2 charging station. And the cost of the charger was about $900, and the cost for the installation was about $600. And I got more than half of that back with the combined federal and state tax credits. On the federal side, businesses can get 30% of the cost of their project back, up to $30,000. So that's a big project. That's putting in multiple chargers for fleet or for workplace, and that can cover a lot of equipment and installation. On the personal side, it's up to $1,000 at that same 30%. Here's the IRS form. And I guess I would just say I'm not a tax professional, so I encourage you to consult with your own tax professional, but there's a real benefit there. On the state side, businesses can qualify for up to 35% of the cost of the project, but there are windows of opportunity where you have to pre-apply and have your project approved first. We anticipate one will be coming out soon from the Oregon Department of Energy, and the link is provided in our presentation materials, so I encourage you to download those. On the personal side, you get up to 25% of the, you get 25% of the cost up to $750. And that's a process where you submit a form, like it used to be for appliances. You submit a form, and then you get a certificate back, and you can use that certificate when you file your taxes. So there is help available in the form of those tax credits, and you can reduce the cost of your project significantly. You know, I wanted to thank you for listening to this information on the webinar, and again encourage you to install electric vehicle charging. It's an exciting time, and it's not as hard as you might think at first. I would encourage you to consult with your electrician or an electrical contractor who have probably done this before, and they can guide you through your project. Here's how to get a hold of us. If you got a particular tough question or a riddle, or you can't figure something out, give us a call, and we're glad to help, and we encourage you to do that. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you, Stan and Rick. We want to remind you of some upcoming webinars and seminars. You can find them at our EnergyEducationCenter.com website. But I wanted to particularly draw your attention to our upcoming seminar on September 18th, Get Plugged In on Electric Vehicles. Rick mentioned this, and it's at Portland State University, and if you attend, you will see vendors and examples of the types of charging stations. You'll be able to walk down and look at Electric Avenue, which is right near Portland State, and of course it'll be a half-day seminar where you'll be learning lots of additional information. So we encourage you to sign up for that. Before we proceed to the question and answer portion of the webinar, I want to remind everyone that you can continue to submit questions to me through chat, and I'll ask them of the presenters during the question and answer portion. And I've just opened up the polling survey. I'd like to encourage you to fill that out and take a few minutes here. We really appreciate your feedback and do use it to improve future webinars. And now I'd like to go ahead and ask the presenters our first question. Let me just go ahead and bring that up from chat. And that question is, how much do the various levels of charging stations cost, and how much does each type cost to install?
Am I on there, Beth?
You should.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks a lot. This is Rick. I'm going to go ahead and take that question. First of all, like I mentioned, for the equipment, the level 1 charging stations, the cost of those is really the cost of a 120-volt outlet. Installations costs are really going to vary from a couple $100 to maybe $300 or $400 if you need to get it out to someplace. If you're deciding you wanted a level 1 parking space out in the middle, I mean, a level 1 charging thing out in the middle of a parking lot, then you can imagine what the costs are going to be for doing some trenching, and typically you'll have a contractor that you'll have to work with to get some typical trenching costs to get that conduit and get that power out to where you want it. For a level 2 station, again, the equipment costs, you know, for a residential station, there's some as low as you know, $400 or so, all the way up to, depending upon the attributes of it, whether it has communications, and you can get text messages from it when your car is unplugged, to ones that have, you know, for commercial use, that have payment mechanisms and are, you know, rated for outdoor use, that can run several thousands of dollars depending upon what your needs are. Installation costs, typically what we see for one that's in easy locations are $2,000 to $3,000. Although if you have an electrical panel that's right nearby, you know, like in a parking garage that has adequate capacity on it, you know, the installation cost could just be a few $100s. For DC quick charge stations, those again, the first ones that came out were $60,000 or $70,000. We're seeing some a little bit lower power DC quick charge ones that are closer to the $10,000 to $15,000 range. So again, there's a wide variety of there depending upon what features and power levels you're looking for. There are even some out there that have battery storage capabilities, and they may run off of single-phase power, and so it doesn't need to have three-phase, and it'll run off that battery. And those could be, you know, $70,000 or $80,000. But there's a wide variety. Our typical installation costs have run about $20,000 for the installation of a quick charge station. Most of those are in public spots that are out, like, for example, out in a parking garage. Out in a parking lot, accessible to the public, so they're out in a, you know, outdoor environment. And, you know, some of the costs could be higher than that, but we're trying to pick locations that are close to a transformer that has adequate capacity. So if you're really starting to think about doing a DC quick charge station, we really like you to give us a call and talk to us about it so we can help you find the most cost-effective place to install that. Assuming that you have maybe a large mall or shopping center or facility, you know, it may be best to you know, have us work with you to help you figure that out.
Thanks, Rick. That's great. Our next question is, if the car is used, if an electric vehicle is used for, say, 15 miles a day, and charging is done for a 30-mile range, can the unused balance of the charge be used for longer drives over the weekends, or does the charge get dissipated if it's not used up daily?
Thanks, Beth. This is Stan. I'll take that question. Yeah, so the battery, it's like fuel in a gasoline tank. If you put 10 gallons in and you use 3 of that to go back and forth to work, you still have 7 gallons. And then if you go home at night and get some more gas on the way home, even if you don't fill up all the way, it adds to the total. So the battery works in a similar way. It's a good question, though, because this is new technology and people are trying to make sure they understand how it works. So if for example, when I first got our electric car, I didn't have a level 2 charging station installed at home. And so we would charge up with a level 1. So that might have gotten us 30, 32 miles of additional distance into that battery in the form of a fresh charge to go out and about the next day. If we drove 20 miles back and forth to work, let's say, then I'm still going to have another 12 left, and then I add to that the next night. So you just add, and you take away what you drive, and it's a lot like the gas tank in a gasoline car.
That's really good information, Stan. Thank you. It looks like our next question is, what is the permitting process like, and where do I start with that?
Okay, this is Rick. I'll take that question. You know, really, it's as simple as in a residence, if you're going to put it inside a garage close to an electrical panel, electric panel, and you have adequate capacity in that panel, an electrician would be able to do that using what we call the minor label program. And so that's similar to just installing a 240-volt outlet in your garage. The electrician can do that in one day. They don't have to go get a permit. They just come in, install it, and they'll stick a sticker on there that's called a minor label permit, and that gets turned in once they've completed a booklet of those, and then that may or may not get inspected. They'll just do a sampling of those inspections. And then, it could be more complicated if you're looking at a large shopping center where you may be changing the use of some spaces and, either removing some spaces, or you have equipment that's in landscaping that may need to be evaluated. But typically right now, a lot of these, locations, we've done, hundreds of these in Oregon. And when we first started a few years ago, it was every city was new, and every city has their own, requirements. But what's happening now is they're becoming more commonplace. So, you're probably not going to be the first one in a city to do one, and so people are really, they've figured it out that this isn't something that special. So you typically need to work with your contractor to figure out where you want this to go and get some bid estimates, and then in most cases, it just requires an electrical permit. Unless you're installing a large piece of equipment, like for DC quick charge stations, some of the jurisdictions are requiring a building permit to go along with that, because there may be some structural reviews of the foundation that that's going to be bolted to. So that's it's really becoming more standard now. So most of the places we're working with have seen this before, and it's not new to them.
Great. Next question we have is, what is the typical time taken for charging at level 1? If you could remind us of that, that would be great.
Okay. Usually what I like to do is think about the different charging levels as how many miles per hour you get of charge. So, really, if you drove your car just a couple miles and came back home, it's not going to take you hours and hours to fill up. But on level 1 charging, that typically adds about 4 miles every hour you're plugged in. Level 2 adds about 12 to 24 miles every hour you're plugged in. DC quick charging adds about 4 miles every minute you're plugged in. Again, that's going to depend upon what level you're at. Is your battery close to empty, or is it close to being full? Because the battery management system wants to make sure you're not overcharging that battery. So it's all controlled by the battery management system on board the car. I think Stan wants to add a little bit more to this. Go ahead, Stan.
Yeah, one of the things we haven't mentioned is how far the cars will go. So if you have an electric vehicle that'll go 80 miles and you're charging it up at 4 miles with each hour of charge, then if it had a fully depleted battery, it might take upwards of 20 hours to completely recharge that battery. But like your cell phone, you don't usually let the battery get down to 0. You come in back to the garage with half charge or quarter charge, and it holds that charge into the future, and then you just add to that. So level 1, we were surprised at our home that level 1 charging was adequate to meet our daily needs. We got a level 2 charger so that we could use the car a couple of times in a day, charge it up, and then go back out with the car again, because it was to us, a quick charge, or a quicker charge compared to level 1. So it's pretty exciting how useful the cars are if you have that charging in place. With a quick charging, you can charge up a Nissan Leaf to 80% power in about a half hour. So again, you can go and keep going, and it doubles or triples the utility value of the car.
Thanks, Dan. I have one more question here. Will I need to notify PGE if I decide to do this, by which I think they mean installing a charger? How do I know if there is enough transformer capacity for EV charging?
Okay, this is Rick. I'll take that question. I think the biggest thing people need to think about is, anytime you add load to your facility, you need to, first of all, start with your electrical contractor and make sure the place you're going to put this, in fact, your panel capacity is going to be adequate, that you don't need to upgrade the panel itself. It may be, a sub panel that's in your parking garage, and you may look at it and say, oh, there's a panel right there, but you got to make sure it's the right voltage and has the right capacity to be able to add charging to it. Then the next step is for that electrician to determine, is it at a level? PG has electric service requirements, and there are some guidelines in there for, if you're adding additional load, of making sure you let PGE know. Certainly, if you're doing a DC quick charge station, that's something you need to make sure you talk to us about, making sure that what we supply to your business is going to do that. Or if you are installing a number of charging stations, for example, for a fleet, then you want to make sure that you have you check with us ahead of time. You know, if you're adding a 120-volt outlet in a parking garage, you probably don't need to check with us. But you need to think about the size of the service going to that facility. So if you're doing a residence and you're adding a level 2 station, you know, we ask you that you go ahead and check with us just to make sure that the power supplied to your residence is going to be adequate to supply that, because you're on a small transformer usually, you know, and sharing that with a number of neighbors. So adding 1 or 2 level 2 stations isn't a big deal. Obviously, working with your electrician, and they should be able to guide you as well. But you know, we would really encourage you to check with us if you're installing, you know, more than a few charging stations, or if you're doing quick charge stations. You'd really need to check with us.
Thanks, Rick. I got another question here, and that is, you mentioned earlier in the presentation, you mentioned renting. If people had rented an EV, where can you rent an EV to test this sort of experience out?
There's a couple of different outfits that have EVs for rent. Enterprise Rent-A-Car has electric vehicles for rent, and Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Hertz Rent-A-Car also is offering electric vehicles for rent.
Yeah, they're going to be starting in this area. They may have some right now, but I think Enterprise is the first one right now.
And then also car sharing programs like Car2Go has both gasoline and electric vehicles available for short-term rentals, and there are 30 of those electric Car2Go smart cars available in the Portland area. So, yeah, that's a great way to get familiar with the technology. Getaround.com also has peer-to-peer car sharing, and there's electric vehicles on Getaround as well. So it's a great way to get behind the wheel and see how it works for you before you make a purchasing decision. One other thing I'd like to mention before we wrap up is a lot of this information and other ideas and suggestions are on portlandgeneral.com/plug-in. And you can go to our website and get a lot of your questions answered. And it also has resources listed where you can go for more information.
Another quick place, if you're a Zipcar member, up at Portland State University, they have 2 Honda Fit EVs that are in their parking garage there that can be checked out, and those are electric. And I think Stan already mentioned Car2Go is one of the other ones. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Rick and Stan. That was our last question. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And we'll stay online for a while in case you'd like to ask any additional questions via chat. But we hope to see you at a future webinar and at the seminar on September 18th. And here I'll leave you with Stan and Rick's contact information if you'd like to jot that down. But we will be sending you the slides and the recording of this webinar within a couple days. Thank you.